Welcome to Eyes on Books. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. I think you're really going to enjoy our show. You're going to be meeting an author, our featured author, William Kent Krueger, and you'll be learning about one of his recent novels, Lightning Strike. I'm Elaine Schnitter, and my co-host today is Charlie Redner. We'll be talking about the book, letting you in on what it's all about, letting you know some information about the author, and then we will actually be able to interview William Kent Krueger via the magic of Zoom. And I think that that's going to be interesting. One of the things about Krueger is that he is pretty well known for a series of 18 novels that feature Cork O'Connor, who's a sheriff of Tamarack County, which is in northern Minnesota. All 18 books have to do with the stories involved in crimes in his jurisdiction. And it gives you a very nice view, not only of northern Minnesota, but also of the intersection of the Native Americans who live there, the Ojibwe tribe, and the white settlers, so to speak, in the surrounding towns. One of the things about Lightning Strike, which is really interesting, is it's a departure from the series in that it actually portrays Cork O'Connor as a 12-year-old. So it goes back in time, and it tells a story of Cork helping his father, Liam O'Connor, who's also the sheriff originally, runs in the family apparently, and there's a crime that they're going to try to solve together. There was an apparent suicide of a reservation resident, Big John Manydeeds, and Cork, as a young boy, knew him and admired him. So when this apparent suicide occurred, Cork decided to get involved in finding out what had actually happened to Big John. It's quite detailed as far as the activities that Cork and two of his buddies go to figure all of this out. The story is very rich in conflict, a lot of personal relationships among the various characters, and it's a very nice coming-of-age story about Cork O'Connor. So Charlie and I enjoyed it, and I think you will too.
I love the book. You know, I'm new to William Kent Krueger. It's my first time I'm reading one of his books, and what I was happy to learn was that he now recommends this as the first book you read, and not Iron Lake, which was the first in the series, if you want to get into the series. So
kind of gives you a view, because here's Cork as a 12-year-old,
right,
and you can see the beginning of his interest in solving crimes. And he's good at it, even at 12.
Yeah, and the reason I love the book too is, you know, set location is important as any other character, and I love the way he writes. He writes poetic prose, and it was beautiful. He writes things like, I found on page 2 that he wrote about the sun, and he said, the sun was a melt of yellow in an aster blue sky. And then on page 4 he comes back and says, beneath a blue sky and a butter yellow sun. I mean, I just love the way he describes, you know, scenes.
Colorful, yes, yeah. Yes.
And a lot of authors try to place you in the scene, and he accomplishes that in spades. I mean, I love the way he does that. I mean, if I was going to give him a blurb, I would say he writes like he sees like a plein air artist, he hears like an audiologist, and he loves like a mama bear for her cubs. I loved the book so much.
Well, his characters develop over time. We could see it quite a bit in Lightning Strike with this 12-year-old coming of age. But in some of the other books in the series, you can kind of track the characters moving from one age group to another and the stories do age along with the characters. So it's pretty interesting. Once you pick up one of Kruger's books, you tend to look for another one because you want to hear more about northern Minnesota, more about the Ojibwe, more about the people in the town and how everything is working there, hoping everything is okay, but there's usually a crime. So usually it's not okay when you read one of his books.
Well, you know, you mentioned conflict. There's so much conflict. There's conflict between law enforcement and the reservation. There's conflict between the mother and the son and the father, and, you know, between the individuals we meet. There's so much conflict, and of course, that's what makes a book interesting, is conflict.
Mm-hmm. And the mother-in-law, yes.
And the mother-in-law, yeah. Who was a full-blooded Indian at the reservation.
Yeah. And she's quite instrumental as a broker between the Native Americans on the reservation and the people in the town, especially because her daughter, Colleen, is married to the sheriff.
Right.
And Colleen is part Ojibwe and part Irish.
Yes.
And so she has some of the traits of her mother, but not all. And little Cork, he's a mixed race child, and he's all of a sudden realizing that in this story. It's becoming more evident to him that he's different. So that's another part of it, which I found really compelling.
Yeah, he has to walk that line, I think, and he's leaning in both directions, but his father is probably doing, this is the way we do detective work, this is how the law is, and this is how we, you know, do things. But Cork can lean towards maybe with some of the spirituality and some of the things that are happening on the reservations. Mm-hmm. And I think he's more trusting of the tribes, where they learn a lot of things from the tribe, and I think he's more trusting than his father is in what he's learning.
Another thing with these boys, the reason they understood some of these backwood areas, which really only the Native Americans knew for sure, was because they had been in Boy Scouts. And the Boy Scout troops used to go out on hikes and campouts in these wooded areas. And so that played a role also in Cork and his friends figuring out what had happened to Big John.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things also authors tell you is that you got to get people into your book in a hurry. Well, he starts with the opening line, before they discovered the body. He starts down there. So you know something's up right away.
Yeah, poor little Cork, 12 years old, and his friend Jorge are walking along, singing a song, 100 bottles of beer on the wall, having a good time, and all of a sudden they come upon a body hanging from a tree. Mm-hmm. And that's what kicks the story off.
Yeah.
Quite quickly you become part of what's going on.
Yes. He says before he gets into the book that there's an underlying theme there. You know, they tried to, this is back in 1953 and 1956, as I recall, during the Eisenhower administrations. They actually tried to close down the tribes. They said they were emancipating them, but it was really terminating them. So there's an underlying theme, and that's why there's such distrust between law enforcement and the reservation and the tribe.
Those relocation acts.
Yeah.
And one of Cork's friends was actually a fellow named Billy, and he and his family did agree to relocate, and he came back because of this death of his tribe member, but he's not too happy. I think Big John was Billy's uncle.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a book, I just finished another book. It's called The Night Watchman, and it's all about what happened during that time. And I never realized that we were still trying to get rid of the tribes. And what they would do is they would not fund them anymore. They would promise that they would take the tribesmen to different locations, give them training, give them jobs, give them housing, and none of that actually happened. So very tragic part
Very
of American
tragic,
history
yeah.
here.
One other thing I did want to mention before we actually meet William Kent Kruger is, in addition to the Cork O'Connor series, he has also written 2 standalone novels, Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, which have been quite well accepted by many reading groups, mine included.
Now I can tell you how much I liked them. I already bought The Tender Land, and I'm listening to it.
Yeah.
I love the audio books. We didn't talk about the audio books, but I
Yeah.
listened to them too.
I guess that's about it. We've given you some background. We don't want to give away the story, but we will be asking William Kent Kruger some questions about the story and how he put some of these pieces together, and about what he thinks about certain relationships as these children go forward with their lives. Well, William Kent Kruger, welcome to Eyes on Books. We're so happy to have you join us today. We're really looking forward to asking you some questions about lightning strike, if that's okay with you.
I'm happy to be with you this morning and eager to answer anything you want to throw at me.
Okay. Well, we have both read your lightning strike, of course. I had previously read many of your Cork O'Connor books and love them. And I have never been in northern Minnesota, but from reading your books, I feel like I have been there many times.
Well, that's one of my goals in terms of the work that I do. I want those people who have never even been to Minnesota, after they have read my work, to feel as if they have had just a very pleasant visit here.
And that was something I was going to ask you. You bring your reader directly into the story. Boom, we're there, and we're seeing everything, and it's real. How do you manage to make us feel so comfortable and familiar in your scenarios? It's just magical. You're a master at that.
Boy, do I love hearing all of this, Elaine. I've been a storyteller for so long now, and the focus of so much of my work has been Minnesota, that writing about Minnesota in a very sensual way comes very naturally to me now. When I write about Minnesota, well, really, I'm kind of writing a Valentine to this state that is my adopted home now. And so I try to offer the reader all of the, just the wonderful sensual experience that they might have if they actually came here. So I try to include not just what it looks like, but what does it sound like? What does it smell like? What is it like to dip your hand into a freshwater lake and taste that crystal clear water? So yeah, I do my best to, really give the reader a tremendous experience.
Oh, absolutely.
It's as important as any character in the book is your settings, and I just love it. I do feel, a lot of people try to make you feel like you're there, but you actually accomplish it. I really mean that. You put me right there in the middle of that forest.
Well, I have always been a writer who writes profoundly out of a sense of place. And those writers whose work I admire and read most often are those who also write profoundly out of a sense of place. Mm-hmm. When I teach, when I used to teach writing, I always taught place before I taught anything else, mm-hmm. because so much of a story rises out of place. Character rises out of place. Motivation rises out of place. Place underlies everything.
And I think all of your Cork O'Connor books have titles that are places.
They are two-word place names.
They're place
some
names.
of them were real, and some of them I have created.
Yeah. Well, I thought that, but your scenario makes me want to get up there one day and jump in a canoe and go out there on one of those lakes and look around that forest. It's just so interesting. And as far as the Native Americans, you describe the Ojibwe so beautifully and so respectfully. That's a wonderful part of your writing, that we learn about a native tribe that we really had never heard of before. So thank you for doing that.
Well, you're quite welcome. You know, whenever I write a story in the Cork O'Connor series, I am painfully aware that I'm a white guy trespassing on a culture not my own. I have no native heritage in me whatsoever. And so I worked very hard to get it right and to portray the Ojibwe culture and the Ojibwe people in as truthful but as positive a light as I can.
Yeah, it's beautiful what you're able to do. And it's not only the forest and the reservation and the lakes, but I almost feel like I've been in that house on Gooseberry Lane and I have sat at that kitchen table. I mean, and the dog is there and the mother-in-law is there. It's just such a warm home and a warm feeling among that family. So also, you know, thank you for that.
Many writers, you know, instructors, I guess most creative writer instructors will say, well, take your characters out to lunch. Well, I'm saying he's been breakfast, lunch, dinner, he stayed for cocktails and had slept overnight.
Yeah.
You know your characters so well. I'm very happy to hear you say that if you were recommending someone that wants to start reading your series, that you now start with Lightning Strike and not Iron Lake. So that made me feel good because I'm a first-time reader of you.
Yeah, you know, it can be, Charlie, it can be very daunting to a reader looking at beginning a series that has 18 books in it, you know?
I know.
Where do you start? And always, before Lightning Strike, always my recommendation was, well, you should start with the first one, because the first 17 books in the series span 15 years in the lives of the characters.
Right.
So if you begin at the beginning and you read in order, it becomes a richer experience because you're watching the characters age, the relationships change, everybody grows. But now I can recommend Lightning Strike because you don't need to know anything.
No, you don't. You meet the 12-year-old.
To appreciate the story. And then I tell folks, if you like Lightning Strike, you're going to see in Lightning Strike essentially who I am as a storyteller. What are the elements that a typical Cork O'Connor novel are going to contain?
Right.
Who are the characters? And if you like the work, then begin at the beginning of the series and start through it.
Is Cork around 36 in the first book?
Cork is, in the very first novel, Iron Lake, Cork is about 40.
Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So in the most recent book, he's in his mid-50s.
Yeah, well, you're getting into that category. I have one complaint. You're writing as much as Stephen King does. You write faster than I can read. I'm sorry.
Well, that's the advantage of having a very deep series. Now
Yes.
you can read in order, and by the time you get finished with them, Charlie, I'm going to have another book or two out there.
Well, 19 is coming out in what, August already, right? So.
Yeah, Fox Creek, which will be number 19 in the series. will
Oh,
be-
wonderful. Congratulations.
Your characters are the same. I mean, some of them have died off perhaps over this 18 series.
Well, yeah, I don't want to give anything away for those readers who haven't read the series, but I'm not afraid to kill off important characters if it's necessary.
Well, remember Psycho? That was that came early in the game.
Yeah.
Now, two of the Ojibwe men, Sam Wintermoon and Henry Mallow, they advised Quirk and his buddies to follow the breadcrumbs to find out what Big John's spirit wanted. And I just thought that was a wonderful way to portray what those kids were after. So how did you use that breadcrumbs idea with the story?
Well, in a typical Cork O'Connor novel, Henry Mallow is one of the most important characters throughout the course of the whole series. For those of you who might not have read any of the series, Henry Malou he is the closest thing I have to a stock character, the wise old medicine man.
Yeah.
Henry Malou is he's a Mide. He's a member of the Grand Medicine Society. He's a healer. He's 100 and, as I'm writing him now, he's 105 years old. He's wise. He's funny. He's courageous. He's compassionate. He farts a lot. And he's the guy that Cork turns to whenever things are so knotted up that he can't quite see his way clear. As you saw in Lightning Strike, Henry never gives Cork an answer. Typically, he will present him with sometimes a riddle or sometimes point a way, and Cork has to then figure things out for himself.
And that's a wonderful character, a wonderful character. And doesn't he even have some way of knowing if someone is coming to visit him? He knows that they're coming, and he's expecting them, and they show up, and his dog starts barking, and they know that they're there. So he is a very interesting character. I liked reading about him in Lightning Strike and also previously.
I like the
Well,
fact.
Henry has explained to Cork on a number of occasions how it is that he understands someone is coming, and he simply says, "I listen to the wood."
I
The
was
wood.
like,
And Cork, bless him, keeps trying to do the woods in the way Henry Malou does. Just doesn't happen.
yeah, wonderful characters, Ken, absolutely wonderful.
There's so much conflict, and obviously there's conflict with everyone on the reservation, with law enforcement. And I was just wondering, it's really a shame in a way, because if they had discovered the difference between a suicide and a murder, it would have helped with the investigation if they had learned a lot earlier.
That, Charlie, you put your finger right on one of the major themes that I wanted to deal with, which is the question of how we perceive the truth of a thing. And the truth of a thing can be seen from different perspectives, particularly depending upon your cultural perspective. And in this case, it is another way in which the two cultures, white and Ojibwe, find themselves in conflict. And the conflict spills not only over the county. The conflict comes into the lives of the O'Connor clan, because they're a clan of mixed heritage. Cork's grandmother is true blood Iron Lake Ojibwe. Her daughter, who is half Ojibwe, married Cork's father. And that was not a very popular move. Either of those marriages wasn't a tremendously popular move within the Ojibwe community. So there are already the seeds of difficulty. And the death of Big John Many Deeds just exacerbates some of that.
Yeah. And you mentioned that the mistrust. I knew about this because I read the Night Watchman back in 1953 and 56. The movement to move the people off reservations and put them into cities. It's tragic, and I'm recalling that now, having read it in Lightning Strike 2, and you mentioned it at the beginning of the book.
You know, I had known nothing about the Relocation Acts until a friend of mine who is a member of the Ojibwe community. He's a law enforcement officer for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and I was up there a couple of years ago, and we were talking, and he told me about the Relocation Act, particularly of 1956, and how it had so dramatically affected his family and so many of the Native communities here in the United States.
Yeah.
And so in casting about for a storyline, I knew I wanted to talk about the devastation that piece of legislation caused in the Native communities.
Yeah, it was shocking, really. I had never heard of it before I read it in Lightning Strike. So it's really tough to read about. And
You know,
I did read This Tender Land, and I know in that novel you focused a lot on the boarding schools where the Native children were forced to attend, and I just thought that was the saddest chapter in our history. It was horrible to think about those children and what was taken away from them. But I did have one thing I wanted to ask you about Cork. As a 12-year-old, he very often in the book, he mentioned that he became despondent and felt that everything was broken. And he really didn't quite know how to put things back together. He didn't know what was happening. So I was wondering, do you think that that summer of 1963 and all of these broken problems that he was facing really changed him as a person? You think he came around a corner as he was growing up because of all of that?
That was certainly one of the points I was trying to make. This is, among other things, a coming-of-age novel.
Yeah.
Prior to this summer, Cork has been unaware, blissfully unaware of so much of the reality of the world around him. And in that summer, he begins to understand that because of his own mixed heritage, people say things about him, about his mother, about his father, that are unpleasant for him to hear. And he begins to understand that the way he has seen the world is not necessarily the way the world is. And that's a realization we all come to as we leave the naivety of our childhood and are forced to embrace the sometimes sad wisdom of what it is to be an adult.
Well, we're kind of running short on time now,
No.
Ken. Yes, I know, I know. We'd like to just have lots of more time with you, but we definitely appreciate you coming here to Southern California today and meeting with us. Our viewers will certainly get a good idea about you now. Maybe they're all going to start with Lightning Strike and move on to your other novels. We hope so. And just appreciate your time. We really do. We really do.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you for coming on.
I hope everyone enjoyed our visit with William Kent Kruger. He certainly is anxious for people to find out more about northern Minnesota and the Ojibwe tribe. So please watch for Eyes on Books and make sure you tune in.
We thank you for tuning in to Eyes on Books. And if you have any books that you think might make an interesting discussion or authors who are good speakers, we'd love to hear your suggestions. Contact us at eyesonbooks@yahoo.com and keep watching